greeting choices of integer.parseInt 0. So what I'm doing here is I go get the first input and I interpret it as an integer. I then pick that greeting out of the list and I assign it to a variable. So now I'm going to print out that greeting and let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to run this file. It's going to give me this error that you guys have all seen before. What's missing?
Input.
Input. Okay, so let's start real simple. Same way I do args0 to get the first input, let's do greeting0 to get the first greeting. So now this said hello. What it did was it took this 0, interpreted this 0 as a number, went into greeting choices and took the first greeting the same way you take the first arg, so it found hello. Put this hello into the variable, printed it out. So if I do 1 here instead, what happens?
Hi there.
Hi there. Okay, so we're good so far. So this is another kind of thing you can do with arrays, right? The code that chooses which greeting I print is really short because the user chooses and we just pass that on through. I don't need to have something instead like string greeting if int choice equals integer.parseInt args0. If choice equals 0, then greeting equals hello. Right, this could go on for a while. I could have another choice. I could have another choice. I'm not typing it just because we're in class. And I want to keep going, but right, this could go on for a while. And I took all of this and combined it into that line. Okay, so back to where we were. That's the kind of power that arrays have. We just need to learn how to use it. So let's start at the beginning. I showed you how to make an array when we just did that quick example. But here's sort of a more thorough version of how that actually works. So there are 2 ways to make an array. One is to say, I want my array to be a new array, and I want to tell you exactly what size it's going to be. This array is going to have 10 integers in it. The problem with this way is, well, okay, so what are your 10 integers? You don't really know. Java doesn't really know either. It just makes them zeros because it doesn't know any better. And then you've got to go in and fill them in on your own. So the same way we use args0 to refer to the first program argument, we can use your array name, bracket 0, to refer to the first thing in the array. And you can assign it just like a variable, and you say that's 5, and you say the next one's 10, and you go on and you go on and you set all the things in your array. That kind of takes a while. We don't like to use it very often because it's not clear what you're doing. It takes a bunch of lines to figure this out. You can make mistakes. You can accidentally leave one off, and then you've got a 0 in there that you didn't really know about. Okay. So the more straightforward way, and the one you probably want to use most of the time, is on the bottom. And this is where you get the whole arrays are a line of things in order. The way you define an array here is you take the type of your variable, like string or integer. You put a pair of square brackets after the type to say this isn't just a string. This isn't just an integer. It's an array of strings. It's an array of integers. That's what the brackets say. They're sort of symbolic. Everybody with me so far? Okay. You have your variable name just like normal, except this time it's the variable name of the array, not any one of those values. On the right-hand side, you just put a bunch of values, one after the other, with commas in between them, like you're saying 1, 2, 3, just like a sentence. And you surround them with curly braces. And that's how you say, these are all the things in the array. There are a lot of curly braces in Java. So where have you seen something that looks like this before? this string bracket variable name. What does that look like?
Function.
Okay, some people said function. Sort of looks like a function. That's not what I'm thinking of. What else does that string bracket variable name look like? What if I change the variable name? Make it start with an A.
Say
I heard
it,
a couple
Grace.
people
you
say
just
it.
said it.
I was waiting for more.
So shy today.
Args. That looks exactly like args. It's got string bracket args. Remember when we didn't tell you what that was? Yeah, well, that's because we hadn't gotten there yet. Args is an array. It's just an array like everything else. When you type your inputs after that command, it counts them. It figures out the right number of inputs you put in. Java does some magic behind the scenes and does something kind of similar to this and creates some array of all the inputs and passes it into your main function to run your program. So that's the same thing. We can create our own arrays too. All right, so I think I already went through this, but it's in the slide for your reference. The way you do the type for an array is you put the double brackets after it. And also in the slide for your reference, you can change the values of an array like we did for that first initialization. When I say, the first thing in the array is 1, the second thing in the array is 10. You change them by writing the same thing that you use to access the value, this bracket 0 or bracket 1 or bracket the index into the array. You just put that on the left-hand side of the equals. And it's very much like changing the value of a variable. If you just say, my array bracket 0 or my array bracket 1, and you assign something to it, it changes that value in the array. Thought I heard something out there. Never mind.
Same.
I'm hearing things. Okay.
No, there was someone. We all heard it.
Okay, so this can be a little tough to get because it's not quite a variable. The only thing we've ever done left of an equal sign is a variable. This isn't really a variable. You're doing some weird bracket thing here. It's like you were doing, x less than 5 left of an equal sign. It's weird. It doesn't look like it should work, but it does work because otherwise we don't have a way to change these things.
I don't get what's going on here. So int
Yeah.
foo is, and then the brackets say 5. So what does that line say?
What does that first line say?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go over to the whiteboard for this one. Okay. So what we've got in the first line, you say this. So I'm making an array of integers. I'm going to have a bunch of integers in a row, basically. What do I want to call all of them? All of them together can be named foo, because foo is just some generic name that we like to use for random stuff that doesn't have a good name. What am I going to set it equal to? I'm going to put it equal to something in braces. What do the braces do? Braces just create an array. That's all they need, is I'm about to create an array when I've got them just to the right of an equal sign, like that. Okay, so what am I going to put in it? I'm just going to stick a 5 in it. So when we take inputs to your program.
So you're changing that to a 10 by in the next one you're saying in position 0, it's now 10.
Yeah, okay. So
if there was 5, 1, 10, and you said foo brought this 3 or 2 is 10, then the one in position 2 would be 10, right? You're changing the one in position 2 to 10, right?
Yeah. So
okay.
Let's go through that piece by piece. So what I do here is I say, this array has one thing in it. It doesn't have a second thing. There is no comma. It's just got one thing. So you can think of it as a big box, split into sections, except this one only has one big section, and it's just a 5 here. In the next line, I say foo of 0 to say, okay, I want this array, but very specifically, I want the first thing in the array. So now I'm pointing to the first thing in the array. What do I want to do with it? I could print it out, I could compare it to something, I could parse it, except I can't parse it because it's not a string. What do I want to do with it? What I want to do is I want to change it. I want to set it to something. So I use assignment. What do I want to set it to? Let's set it to 10, because that's on the slide. So when I set it to 10, what that does is, okay, foo of 0. I want to find the first element of foo. So I go into this box, I find the first thing in the box, I say, all right, this is the thing I want to change. So I erase that, and then I make it a 10. This isn't very interesting when you've just got 1. So like Marissa said, let's do more. Let's make this box actually have sections. Gosh, this marker's terrible. Okay, so let's say I've got a 5, and then a 3, and then a -1. So now this box has 3 different zones. One of them has a 5 in it, one of them has a 3 in it, and one of them has a -1. And then let's change a different one of these. Okay, now what happens? It changes the 3. Yeah, good. Okay, so this time I did foo 1. So I count 0, 1. I want the thing in this box. And what do I do to it? I set it equal to 10. Okay, so this is changing stuff in arrays. Changing just like variables. Question 1.
So earlier, when there was like only one input in there, I don't know, and if you were to try changing like number 1, will it add another thing in there, or will it just say error? Because there is no number 1.
Which slide am I on?
I don't know.
Not far enough. Okay,
Oh, okay.
we're getting there, but good question. So let's get there faster. Okay, there's only one thing again. Just ignore the rest of that, I guess. Comment it all out. Okay, so I try to set the first one. What does it do? Okay, Java goes, okay, this is 0, and this is 1. 1 doesn't exist. Arrays have a fixed size. You create them at that size, and they always stay at this size. So this thing always ever has 1 element. So Java goes, okay, 0, 1, there's nothing here. And it's going to throw an error. What error is it going to throw? Array index out of bounds exception. You guys have seen this one before. Whenever you try to get args 0 and your program doesn't have any inputs, what does that mean? When your program doesn't have any inputs, I'm going a little bit aside here, but it's worth it, I promise. If you didn't give any inputs to your program, then your args looks like this. Your box has nothing in it. It's empty. It has no width. So when you try to get args 0 and do something with it, it says, all right, I want the 0, 1 for the very first thing in the box, and it can't find it. So it throws this error. And that's the reason you see that error when you don't have any input, is because this array only has 0 things in it, because you had nothing on it. Good question, even though it took us on kind of a tangent. I think it was worth it. Did everyone follow along with that? Yeah. Do you have a question too?
That was it.
That was it. Okay. Great minds think alike, I guess. Moving on. I said these were exactly the same, and I guess that's technically a lie, but we'll talk about it later. So, exactly the same way you've changed these, exactly the same way we changed these, you've already read from them. reading from them means using the value. So if I want to use the value of foo, I can get the 0th thing of foo and use that as a variable, just like we use args bracket 0 as a variable. You can say integer.parseInt args bracket 0. In the first lab, you could also, in the first lab, you also saw we could do integer.parseInt of double quotes 5 or double quotes 103, right? You could also do string value equals double quotes 103, and you could do integer.parseInt of that. args0 was just taking the place of some other string or some other variable on that right-hand side. You can do the exact same thing with any other array too. I can say foo bracket 0, and I can have that, I can add that to something. I can do foo bracket of 0 plus 10. I can print out foo bracket of 0. Yeah, so that's how you use them. And now we have created arrays. We have messed with the value in arrays. And we haven't actually done it on the slides, but you guys have already used values in arrays. So we're going to put it all together, and we're going to try to write a sample program that prints out the squares of some value. So like if I input 3, I want it to print out 9. If I input 4, I want it to print out 16. But after we read the input, we're going to try to do this without actually doing any multiplication. We're just going to look up some squares that we've already computed. So hop into Cloud 9, and let's try it out. So this one you guys should follow along. And here's the 30-second activity, is to make a new file, call it squares.java, and get it ready to write code in.
What the heck? Where is it? Call it what? Squares. Java.
Where is everybody? Ready to keep going? All right, I see mostly thumbs, so I'm going to start. Other folks can catch up with me. So what I had on the slide was eventually at the end, I want to be able to print this out. I want to say the square of whatever the user typed in is, and then look up the value in this squares array. So what I need to do is I need to get the user input. Me? Yeah, sure. I was just letting everyone work along. I can copy paste though.
The reason I suggested is that they type code much more slowly than you do. So for you, it's really fast to crank that out. But for them, it's like a good idea to copy paste.
Yeah, but you haven't given them the slides yet.
Oh.
You should do that.
My bad. All right, I'll put the slides in maybe.
Maybe.
Figure out.
Good point, Josh. Good point.
What happens when I'm left to do things like putting things in the right place?
This is why Julie's classes go much more smoothly. I said, this is why Julie's classes go more smoothly.
That's actually true.
All right. It's probably too late for this one.
Sorry, you guys. I'll work on that.
All right. I'm going to move on when the sounds of typing die down. Okay, I think we're mostly good. Yeah? Okay, so if I were to run this now, I know exactly what it's going to say. It's going to yell because squares doesn't exist, and I used squares. So our job is we need to tell it what the squares are. So what should I write? What's the first thing I should write? Squares?
Yes.
Squares. Okay.
Does you want to write the type of array it's going to be?
Okay, how do I write the type of array it's
Like
going to be?
int, double, or string, and then the whatever.
The brackets.
And then squares, because that's going to be the name of the array, right?
Square brackets. You can just call them brackets and it'll be okay.
So double, I guess?
Sure, let's do double. So
Double,
I
square
want an array of
brackets.
doubles, so I write double, and then I write these square brackets. Don't put a space in the middle.
Oh.
Huh?
Is there a reason?
Is there a reason? The same reason I don't put a space in the middle of double. Java will think it's two different things. So if I put a space in the middle of the brackets, it's harder to see because the color doesn't change, but Java will think it two different things, and I think it won't work. But you can always try it out. Okay, so I wrote double squares. What's the next thing I want to do? Someone who hasn't already helped. I've got a variable that's an array of doubles. Probably want to put something in it. Yeah. So I realized, yeah, question? Could I zoom it in? Yeah, I'm sorry. Is that better or more?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I realize these symbols sound really similar. If you call them brackets for the square ones and braces for the curly ones, Julie and I and other people who've been doing this for a long time will understand what you mean, but they're really similar words. It's fine if you just call them curly ones and square ones, and we'll probably figure out what you're talking about. Okay, so I've got a double array, an array of doubles called squares, and I want to assign it to some new array. What should I put in the array? User input. Well,
Square root of user input, right?
or the square of user input. Is
Oh,
actually
square,
what I
I'm
want,
sorry.
right?
Right.
But what I really want to happen is, I'm just going to write this in a comment so that it's all here. If the user inputs 0, what's the square of 0? What do I want to get?
0.
0. If the user inputs 1, what do I want to get?
1,
The user inputs 2, what do I want to get?
4.
4.
This keeps going, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. So, you know how you args of 0 to get the first one?
Yes.
You do args of 1 to get the second one?
Oh.
Args of 2 to get the third one? They're in order somehow? Okay. So if these are all in order based on what the user inputs, then what's the first thing I should put in here? If the user inputs 0, I'm going to get the first thing in this array because of that. So the first thing I want here is 0. 0 is the very first square. 0 is the square of 0. And then next comes 1. And then I think you guys get it from this point. And I got 4, and I got 9, and I got 16, and I got 25. So let's move this down next to the rest of the code. so we can see it all in one place.
Wait, but that only gives you an array if the user only inputs 1 through or 0 through 5.
That's correct. For now, let's just start with that because that's still pretty good.
Okay.
Not good enough for you.
Let's start with that. So if I run this, it's going to ask me for input. It's going to say I don't have input. Let's try putting in 3. So now I got the square of 3 is 9. So that's because I got my user input. My user input was 3. I came down here and I tried to print out squares bracket 3. So I went in here and I counted out 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, and I said, this is the one that corresponds to squares bracket 3. And Java got that one and printed it out. Okay, following along so far. Okay, Marissa pointed out that this probably isn't a very good program. It can print the square of 0, and it can print the square of 5, and it can print the square of everything in between, and it can't print the square of anything else. So, if you guys were writing this program, instead of using an array, what else might you want to do?
Function.
A function. Okay, what could I call my function? Square. So I write a function by doing public static, the type of a square. We already said the type of a square was a double. And then we said the function was going to be called square. It's going to square a number. And what's the type of the number? Well, user input's an integer. So let's take an int. And then I write a pair of matching curly braces, go between them and hit enter. And then what do I return from this function? Someone who hasn't helped yet. Is everybody following along, or did I go too fast? That required at least one answer.
People, be honest. This class is for you guys. If he's going too fast, he's going fast for me, and I have a PhD. So if he's going fast, you have to say something.
Okay. I'm gonna back up.
But where are you lost? Like, could you be more specific? Like, were you lost at the beginning? Are you lost like a slide ago? Like
Line 22. Okay, let's redo this.
what did they just say?
Line 22, when we started doing the function.
Oh, okay.
Question or no? Okay. All right, let's try doing a function again. This is new as of last class, so
Right.
It's understandable that you guys don't get this yet. I kind of ran ahead because I'm used to it and I shouldn't have ran ahead. I apologize.
First, do you guys all get why we're doing a function? Does everyone get that?
No. Okay.
Okay, so let's.
So one way to do this was to have an array, and we look up some squares that we already computed in an array, right? I can look up the square of 0, I can look up the square of 1, I can look up the square of 2, but I can't get all the squares. So we know if you've got a number, how to square that number, right? If I've got 3, in order to square it, I just multiply it by itself, right? So instead of looking up some square in an array, I can compute the value. Given whatever you did as input, I can compute what its square is. I can calculate it within my function and calculate it within my program and print it back out. The reason we're using a function for this is just because squaring a number seems like something that you're probably going to do in a lot of different places. You'll do it here. I might do it somewhere else in my program. Maybe I won't do it somewhere else in this exact program. But it's a good habit to get into to write this function so that I only have to write the code to square a number once. And then I just say square parentheses number, and that number is squared. And I can do that anytime I want. So what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to write this. I want to be able to write just square user input and have whatever the user input is get squared. I want that to be some function, just like integer.parseInt, just like system.out.println, that is just there, that I can call and that I can use, and that it will turn user input into the square of user input. So it'll turn 3 into 9. It'll turn 18 into, that was a bad example. It'll turn 12 into 144. Okay, so the problem is square doesn't exist. Or at least if it does exist, we don't know where or what it's called or how to find it. So we have to write it ourselves. What's the first thing we have to do when we write a function? There are some magic words that have to go at the beginning of every function. Public static. Doesn't matter what your function is. For now, these just have to go at the beginning or it doesn't work. Okay, what's the next thing that we have to write to define a function? Double. Why double? Yeah, you're finding the square, and the square of a number is a double. That's what we said. So this is what the function returns. Yeah, good. Okay, so we got the magic words, we got the return type of the function. What comes next when you define something? The name of the function. Okay, we already came up with a name for this function. We said we wanted it to be called square. So I'm just going to copy that and put that down here. Okay, so we've got the magic words, we got the type, we got the name of the function, and there is one last thing we have to have before we can go put those braces in and start writing code. What is it? We need the parentheses and we need the input, and I heard someone say an integer. So I'll do int, and then what do you guys want to name the input for this?
Human input or like?
Well, this is the number we want to square, right?
Right, but it depends on like what the human input is, right? Because whatever they put in is going to score it. So why not user input?
Okay, so we can call it user input again for now. The tricky thing with calling this user input is you have to realize that this user input and this user, well, never mind. We'll get there. That's later
Oh,
this
okay, no,
class.
let's not call it user input. Let's call it like, I don't know.
We'll just call it input. It's got a different name. We don't have to worry about whether they're the same. Okay, so how do I tell this function to return the square of this number? Someone who hasn't helped yet on writing the function.
I mean, I don't even know.
Okay, there is a word we need to use to tell the function what to give back. Return. Okay, so we're going to return something. And what are we going to return? How do we actually make how do we calculate input squared? We don't have a little exponent symbol, and we can't do like a 2 as an exponent. So how do we calculate squaring something? Just return input? Okay, so if I call square with 3, what's it going to return?
9.
Well, if I call square with 3, then it assigns 3 to the value of input.
Oh, wait, yeah, okay. Never mind.
Like args times args. Okay, so what is the arg in this case?
Let's say we have args 3 times args 3, that'd be 4 times 4, and then that's 60.
Yeah, so sorry, train of thought. Right. So the input for this function is called input. The input for main, if we go back up here, the input for main was called args. So that's why when we talk about input to your program, we always call it args. It's the arguments to your program. But down here, we wrote our own function. It has input that's just called input. So instead of doing args times args, we can just write input times input. We don't have to parse it as an integer because this time it's already an integer.
Nice.
So that isn't an array.
This isn't an array because it doesn't have these square brackets after it.
So we should just put return input times input?
So if you do return input times input, it's a lot easier to read this than it is to write it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I put 3 into this one, now what does it return?
9.
Now it returns 9. If I put 5 into it, it returns 25. Okay. This looks like what we want it to do. Okay. So now, I still like my array. Maybe that's just me, so I'm going to comment it out. I don't need it. I want to keep it around for later. I'll try to delete the rest of this so it all fits on the screen at once. Now I'll try running this again. And we still get the square of 3 is 9. But now what happens if I do this? Well, sorry, that's not good. What happens if I do this? Why? There is no input for 10 in what? So there was nothing for 10 here.
Did
That
you
was why we
close
wrote
the
a
curly
function.
bracket after the public static double square input, and then you open the bracket? Did you close it?
Where?
After the public static double square,
Here?
after the function?
Yeah, that's here. So, yeah, sorry, getting back to what you were saying. There was,
I was thinking array.
yeah, there was no 10 in the array, but since we did a function, it'll just multiply it. It should work. We get 100.
No. One error, exception in thread.
All right, I'll let Julie come look at yours.
Wait, this just proves I just use functions and not
Okay, we got one comment that said this just proves that you should use functions and not arrays. Okay, this was one example, guys. Maybe arrays weren't the best thing for this example, but they're a tool. There are times to use them. There are times to not use them. In the homework, you're going to build a tic-tac-toe board. And that's a lot harder to do with a function.
No.
Because that's something that you want to update multiple times. Functions don't really work as well for updating things. But arrays, you can update and you can change, like we saw over on the whiteboard. So maybe this is just a bad example. I apologize, but you will use them. They're important. Okay, so we will make this code available after class. For now, I'm going to go ahead and flip back to the slides here. So if you guys didn't get it all working perfectly, we'll try and provide it in the class examples folder in your workspace. We'll try to get that out to you sometime soon after you go home. Okay, we already talked about this thanks to some great questions early in the class. If you try and put some number in here that doesn't work inside the array, if I try to go negative, you can't really go negative, right? It starts counting at 0 and it goes up. There is no negative. So it's going to print out some array index out of bounds, just like you always see when you don't have arguments, and it's going to say -1 is the problem.
I
Yeah.
have a question about the function again.
Yeah.
So I don't get where you're telling the function how to get its input from. Like, so you wrote a random function, but like, how does it know what you want to send to that function? Because you might want to send different things to different functions at different times, right?
Yep.
So how did it know that we want the input for arg0 to go to this and then output it. You know what I mean? Like, where
Yep.
did we define that?
Okay. So everything about this particular function that will happen every single time it gets called is defined right here. So right here, I say whenever this function receives input, we're going to call it input. We're just going to pretend that input is whatever number you pass into it. The way we hooked this up to what the
Oh,
user
to the-
provides in the program args is up here. So up here, integer.parseInt of args0 is the thing that you guys have seen over and over and over
Mhm.
for how you get a number from here to inside your program. We took user input and then we passed user input into square. So what we did is we took the argument that you gave to your program, we turned that into a number, and then we took that number and we passed it to your square function. So we kind of propagated
So
it
that's
along.
the link up there, the square
Yeah.
parentheses
The thing I'm
user
highlighting
input.
right now is the link between the input you give to your program and the input I give to the square function.
Did you all get that? Did you get that before I even asked the question? Okay, so I just didn't see that, but now I see it. But I'm glad they got it, because that's good. That means they're like, their brain is clicking computer science wise, because that's like, yeah. No, seriously, it's really good.
Okay.
You guys are better than the person with the PhD.
Or they just could be paying attention more while I was on my phone, but.
Okay.
Off.
Other questions on this before I moved on, because I kind of jumped out of it just a minute ago.
Okay.
All right, looks good for now. Feel free to ask questions now or later. We'll jump back, it's fine. Okay, so we did some weird things with an array. Come on, Chrome, you can do it. We did some weird things with an array and it didn't work out, just like when you forget to give input to your program. Right. If you haven't seen this one, try it out. You'll see the error. It'll look familiar, but it's good to get some experience with it. So we said every array has a fixed size. Well, every array also knows its size. You can ask it how long it is. This isn't necessarily going to be useful now. This slide is just more for later. When you want to figure out how to do this. It's there as reference for you. But this array that we created that has two numbers in it knows that it has two numbers in it. If I say that array dot length, it will tell you how many numbers it has in it. That's how long the array is. Kind of useful fun fact. You don't really need it for now because here you know it's got two values in it. You can divide by 2 instead. Not really going to be useful on this homework either, but it'll have a purpose down the road. So we're just giving it to you so that you can see it, get used to it.
You could use it to find out how many arguments were given.
You could. Instead of seeing that array index out of bounds 0, you could check args.length for your program input. And you could say, did I at least receive 1 input? And if you didn't receive 1 input, you could, instead of printing out this crazy error message, you could tell the user, hey, if you don't provide me 1 input, I don't work. You should make sure your input is a number. You can print that out. And it's just like that error checking for cashier. It's a nicer way to tell someone that they messed up. So that's one good use. Yeah. Okay. We're about to transition off of arrays for now. There's some more practice problems on the lab, and we're going to do some more practice with this later, but are there any other high level, low level, I didn't get this, whatever other type of questions before we move on? Okay, none for now. That works.
Bathroom break.
Bathroom break?
Make it pretty quick.
Water break?
Still lots to go and water. It just raises like 30 degrees.
It's a little chilly.
I have a jacket like with this thick old inside thing on, and it is cold.
Sorry.
Oh, I hope someone or something happens like to your chat.
How long does your hair stay straight?
If I let it will stay for about 3 days, I think, and then it'll start getting wavy.
How fast does it get like wavy and then your normal hair again?
Oh, when I like wash it, it's just wavy.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I've never had that feeling before.
Have you ever curled your hair?
It never really stayed
Like
unless
manually
I
curl
like manually curl. What does that mean?
Made it into an afro by hand.
Ah,
Jeff, my thing won't load.
Again. How do I keep doing it to us?
Here.
Oh, it's been like that for like the whole
I
time.
think it's gotta move. You can use the function. You should just go to the slide.
So, shit.
Let's just go with that.
Did you have the truth on
Strauss. Same. Oh, hey, go you.
We run into this problem.
Oh,
Before I really know the answer is.
By yours?
It seems to be
Yes.
Oh,
like-
I have sour patch.
It's actually really easy compared to Algebra 2 Honors. It is so easy. What?
I miss algebra.
Oh, you don't miss Algebra 2 Honors.
I miss algebra.
Yes.
Well, yeah. 8th grade math was awesome.
That one. Oh my god. No. I'm very resourceful.
I mean, you don't really need it.
Have another one. Well, I have to try that.
I mean, what do you have?
Can we put it? Wait, analyze grades?
What? Analyze? Where?
What is that?
What are you talking about? Oh, oh, that was just like random thing in bio.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, whatever.
How was your bio test?
Haha.
Is that a good or no?
I'm done with it, so I'm good. I'm pretty happy. Oh no, it's fine. How did you know I have mine?
Because I have friends.
Okay, good. What class is your friend? What are your friends in?
Anisha.
Anisha. Okay.
Yeah.
She's in my class.
Second period?
Yeah.
Okay, I know it.
Same. I know people too.
Does Marissa know about last week?
Oh,
Last week's club.
didn't she text us? Did she message us? She like messaged us about it. And I was like, lol. We gave up. Let me check. Last week's messages.
People who showed up.
No, anyway, so I was like, eh. Oh no. Whoa.
Why? Brian, are you also getting paid?
Do you have a sister?
Yeah.
What's her name?
Are you getting paid?
Oh my god, wait, she's a junior?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you getting paid 11 per hour? I'm sure I am
Okay,
too.
bye-bye.
I just want to talk with
Oh,
people
it's really fast.
to make sure that I am.
It's okay. Eventually it'll change. Good thing is they just have to really
We're not doing that. I'm actually working with the schools. So your Saturdays are free. I'm gonna work with the schools to get it in the school.
What?
Yeah, after school program.
Oh, wait, what's
Maybe not necessarily Crinton, but Graham for sure.
oh.
Like I met with a teacher from Graham today.
So close to Christmas.
Well, Crinton had an after school girls program, at least according to
They're lying.
Our girls.
It's not the same. Not us.
That's what they said. They said they didn't do it because it wasn't ours and it wasn't as good.
Oh,
Okay.
Need a higher eye.
Everybody back. That was fast. Nice. Okay. So we're moving on to something that's not arrays, but that we have to do because we're learning arrays and we're learning how to mess with arrays. Some slide ago, I said that you can change values in arrays just like you can change variables. And I said that was mostly true. Well, this is the mostly true part. It works slightly differently. So we're going to do a quick dive into how changing variable values works in Java. And if I change args0, what happens? If I change input inside that square function, what happens? Does it change the user input on the outside? Does it not change the user input on the outside? What is actually going on here? So this section is going to be a lot of drawing pictures once we go over the basics. There's not going to be a lot of code, but when we're done or while we're going, feel free to run it as code because all of the pictures are just going to be describing what the code does. So there are actually two types of things in Java. I've called them all values so far, but when you've got a variable, your variable is actually either a value, like just a number, or just a string, or it's a reference to some values, like an array. An array isn't actually a number or a string. It just points to where some numbers or some strings are. And you have to index into the array with some square brackets in order to actually get a value, like a number or a string. This is kind of a technicality. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, that's okay. That's why we're having this section. It's a technicality, but it's a technicality that has some really weird consequences. So we need to look at the differences now so you don't start writing programs that do bizarre things and have no idea why.
Why
Question?
would you need like something to get the value? And if you could just put like what the value is, like why would you need something?
Why would you need something to sort of tell you where that is?
Yeah. Just like say the value.
So in computer science in general, and I'm sure in other things too, we call this a layer of indirection. Indirection meaning it's kind of like what Toad says in Super Mario, if you guys are old enough to have ever played that. It's like, thank you for rescuing me, Mario, but the princess is in another castle. Mario just keeps bouncing from level to level to level to level to level until he finally gets there. It's indirection. He tries going in one direction, it's not actually there, but he gets pointed to a new place. So then he tries going over there. Well, the value's not actually there, so he has to go to a new place. Or in this case, the value is the princess. Why would we do this? For now, the answer is reasons, but you can kind of think of it as the same reasons you would use an array, right? We used an array to dynamically choose this greeting or choose which square we were going to print out. Or in tic-tac-toe, we're going to use an array to represent a whole board. And then depending on what the user plugs in as input, 0, 0, or 1, 2, to pick that square on the board, we're going to have to fill in that particular spot on the board. So if you had variables for all of those, you would need some big if-else clause to figure out which variable you need to update. If you've got an array, you can just sort of point to where the exact one you want. And you don't need to do a bunch of conditional maybe, if this, then that logic to figure it out. That's going to be a recurring theme. And you'll start to see more and more of it as we start to see more and more complicated programs. Functions are sort of a layer of indirection too. Instead of just writing 3 times 3 or user input times user input, we said, well, I'm going to delegate this to the square function. and you point it over there. And then the square function does something. So it's saying, well, I'm not actually going to give you this value, but I'm going to tell you how to get it. You get it by doing this function.
So we wouldn't have the value already if we use references to the values. Like, we'd use the references to get to where we need to go.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason we're doing this is because assigning to arrays, like saying foo bracket 0 equals, is slightly different than assigning to a variable like int x, where you just say x equals. So yeah, to understand why, we need to actually walk through this, draw some pictures, and figure out what happens with this layer of indirection, this reference to the array. So we got some code. I'm just going to walk through this example to show you. This is basically what the pictures are going to look like for the rest of the slides. We got some code. On the very first line, we assign int x to 5. So we got this variable x. It's a name tag. It is directly associated with the value 5. There's nothing in between them. It's just x to 5. So when we assign x to 10, what happens? X becomes 10. The 5 doesn't go away. The number 5 still exists. I mean, if the number 5 actually went away when you unassigned it from a variable, we would have some problems in our code because you could never have 5 twice. 5 still exists, but now x is directly connected to 10. Because we said, you know what, I want x to be 10 instead. So this is what happens. X is just some name tag that we say, okay, 10 and x are now synonyms, essentially, because we assigned x to some different value. Is everyone with me so far? Okay. This is how just regularly assigning a variable in Java works. This is what it looks like. So when we print x, what do we get? 10, right? X is 10. X is a name tag. We write it. We change where the name tag is. It used to stick on 5. Now it sticks on 10. X is 10. Straightforward. Okay. Now let's do this. On the very first line, x is 5. On the second line, I say int y equals x. So now what boxes do you think I'm going to have?
Y.
There's going to be a y. And what's it going to point to? 5. Why not x? X is 5. Good. That was fast. Y points to 5. Not x. Y points directly to 5 because we say, well, y equals x. What is x? X is 5. Okay, so y is 5. We assign y to 10. Y changes. X doesn't. Right? Have you guys seen this in your programs before? Have you assigned one variable to another variable, changed one of them, and both of them are different? I think we did that in one of the intro, one of the first or second week. But this is important. This is how you don't accidentally have multiple copies of the same variable floating around. You're just copying x into y. But they're both different variables. They're both different name tags. They can point wherever. Okay, just a summary for when you go and look at the slides later. Okay, so now we get arrays. Arrays are weird. There's a layer of indirection here. What is x? X is an array. X doesn't point to the 5 anymore. It points to some array. This array has one element because that's all I could fit on the slides. That element happens to be 5. But x doesn't point all the way to the element. X just points to the array. So now when I assign y to x, what happens? Same thing as the last slide. Y points to the array. We say, where does x point? We make y point to it. Okay. Now I say y equals the array with 10 in it. Now what happens? X goes to 1 and y goes to the other. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. X is going to one array, y is going to the other array. This is just like assigning a number, right? X went to 5, Y went to 5. We said Y equals. When we say Y equals, it changes where the arrow from Y goes. So if I say Y equals a new array, then I take the arrow from Y, I detach it from where it was, I move it to this new array. This is still pretty normal. We haven't gotten to the weird stuff yet. This is good. Okay, so same thing as last time. X equals the array 5, Y equals X. Now we say Y of 0 equals 10. So now what happens? This one is the confusing one. So it's okay if you guys don't know.
Is the 5 supposed to be in the little brackets thing? Is that what because there's like an arrow.
There's an arrow here. The arrow is pointing from this particular spot in the array to the 5. So that means that there's an array, and the first thing, the very first thing in the array is 5. So the very first thing in the array is a name tag, but it doesn't actually have a name. So this is kind of how I'm representing that. Does that make sense?
Wouldn't the array of 10 because Y0, the very first thing is 10?
What do you mean by the array would go to 10?
Because the bracket is 0.
Yeah. Can you say that in terms of arrows from something to something else?
So
From
the bottom one.
From the bottom one? That one?
Yeah. Would that go to 5? I mean to 10
Yes.
because of the.
That's exactly what happens because where's this? We're changing what this points to. What's Y of 0? Y of 0 is this spot. We're changing where this spot points to. We're not changing what Y points to. We're changing what this spot points to. So that spot is going to change. But now what happened to X? X is now a different array. This is the first instance where messing with Y has actually messed with X too, right? Because X still points to the same array. But now the first element of X is different because the first element of X is also the first element of Y. This is what I meant by this layer of indirection screws us up. Every other time when you copy X into Y, it was completely different. You could do whatever you wanted. It wasn't going to change anything. You had 2 copies. This time, there are arrows within the thing you copied. The array gives you this level of indirection where the things in the array can actually be changed. In integer, you couldn't actually change. You could just change where this arrow pointed. But the things in the array, you can change where they point. They can point to a different integer in this case. So messing with Y actually messed with X.
So if you do something like X bracket 0 equals a value, would that do the same thing again?
That would do the exact same thing again because X bracket 0 goes right here as well. They point to the same place. Yeah?
Let's say that the where it says Y0 equals 10, that was a 5, but it showed 2 5s or just 1 5?
That's an interesting question. I think I know the answer.
For the sake of this exercise, it's 1, 5.
Okay. Then it would be 1 5.
With respect to the things we are learning right now, it is 1, 5.
The answer is it doesn't matter. Because you as the programmer can't tell 1 5 apart from another. But yeah, let's just say it's 1 5. Make it easier. Good question though. Okay. Everyone good with this slide, with what's happening on this slide? Because this part's new and different. Yeah, so far? Okay, so let's do the same thing we just did with some functions. Now, remember, we said in Julie's class that you can't actually type your function straight into the middle of your code. But I did it here so that I could fit everything on one slide and try to make it read through. So I've defined this function foo. What foo does is it takes an integer, reassigns that to 10, and prints it out. Julie's making a face. Why is Julie making a face?
I don't like that the int x equals 5 is on the other side of the function as the rest of the code that's using x. It makes it look as if there's an order to it.
It does make it look as if there's an order to it. That's just how I wrote it because that was how I thought about it. It doesn't need to be in order. Maybe Julie, since she's sitting off to the side, can go change it. That's what you get for not liking it. Okay, so this one, what it's going to do is it's going to assign x to 5. It's going to come down here and do foo of x, and then it's going to print out x. But doing foo of x is going to come do this stuff first. So what's going to happen? We assigned x to 5, x points to 5, we call foo of x. What happens here? Well, when we call foo of x, x is the input. So we need to take y, which is what foo expects as input, and make y equal to the input we gave it. So we make y equal to 5, because x was 5, and we passed x as input. Is this making sense so far? Yeah, okay. So we had x equals 5 up at the top. Yeah. We called foo of x. Foo expects one input. Its input is named y. So in order to run foo, we have to tell foo, well, what was your input? Your input, which you expect to be called y, is x, which is 5. So we set y to 5, or we set y to x, in order to let this function run. Does that make sense? Okay, hopefully this picture will also help with functions. Now we assign y to 10. What happens? Y goes to 10. Exact same thing that happened the first time when there were no functions. Y goes to 10, we print it out, we get y as 10 inside the function, and then we fall at the end of the function. It was void, it didn't return anything, we didn't assign it anything. Then we print out x. X is still 5, x didn't change. Yeah? We're all on board? Okay, next example. We're gonna go through the same examples we just did with arrays. So, x points to an array that has a 5 in it. We call foo of x. In order to call foo of x, we have to assign y to x. So what happens? Y points to the same array that x does. Now, inside of foo, we went up here, we assigned y to x. We execute this first line. We assign y to the array with 10 in it. So what happens? Y goes to 10. Not just 10. Yeah, it goes to an array with 10 in it. Same thing as when we just had this as straight up code. Right? We assigned y to a new array, it pointed to a new array. Does the same thing when it's inside a function. So we print out y of 0. What does it print out? Somebody else? What is y of 0 here at this point? I heard different answers. Let's hear more answers. Get a consensus. Well, I guess a couple will have to do. So it used to be. It used to be the first thing in the array. But then we reassigned y. Now it points to a different array. So now, after we reassign y and we execute this print, it's 10. So that's going to print out 10. And then we're done with the function. It's void. It didn't return anything. So we go back to after the function and we print out x of 0. And we get 5. Right? Because x still points to, has always pointed to this array that has 5 in it. So Now we do the same thing for that third case. So, people who haven't answered yet. I've got this array, which is x. I come down here, I call foo of x. In order to call the function, I need to assign it to y. So, y points to the same thing x does. On the first line of the function, while I'm executing this function, I assign y bracket 0 to 10. Somebody who hasn't answered yet, what happens? Which one goes to 10?
Oh, why?
Y?
Or X? Oh,
Okay, yeah, this is the confusing one. So I'm changing y of 0. So which box is y of 0?
fine.
So I want y, and I want the very first thing in it. So what I actually want is this box right here. This is the one I'm changing. So the arrow that starts here is the one that's going to be different. This arrow will point somewhere else. And this is why it's the weird case, because this arrow you can reach by either x or y right now. So I changed that one when I actually changed the value in the array. So now, because I changed y, even though I'm inside a function, right? I'm not even in the same part of code. This function could be somewhere else in your file. It could be after all the rest of your code. It could be before all the rest of your code, like we saw last class. I'm inside a function. You'd think the code was completely separate. But if I mess with this array that I got as input, it's actually changing x, which was outside the function. This is weird. It's scary to me. You guys probably, it seems normal for now, but this is weird. I don't like it.
Why is it changing x?
Why is it changing x? So, what I'm changing here isn't y. I'm not changing where y points. Y still points to
Oh, you're
x.
changing the input for foo. So now the input for foo, by calling foo parentheses x, you're saying x replaces, like,
I'm
what's
saying that y gets assigned to x here. So that's this picture where they all point to the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to run foo, I have to rename its input to y. So y gets to be this array. And then I change y of 0, y bracket 0. What that does is it doesn't change where y points, it changes where the 0th thing in y points.
Mm-hmm.
So I change where this arrow goes. From the picture, I can also reach this arrow from x. If I look at x of 0, I get to the same box. So I didn't change where x points, I just changed the stuff inside the array x. Does that make sense? Still confused?
Yeah.
Do you know what part, or just in general?
I don't get why, so I don't get why when you say y of 0 equals 10,
Mm-hmm.
it changes the x array.
Okay. So the reason it changes the x array, well, let's go back up a slide. When I changed y, I didn't change x at all. I just changed the arrow from where y was. That's how you can think about messing with variables. You just change where that arrow goes from the variable. So when I changed y from the array up here to y to the array down there, I didn't mess with any of the arrows in x. I didn't mess with any of the arrows that I could reach from x, right? Because if I were to just look at this as code, the way you see it is you see sort of what would happen if you smashed all of these arrows together and didn't actually have the arrows, right? You see the 5 itself inside of these braces, and you see these braces assigned to X, right? I change where Y points, I just change where the arrow for Y points. I don't change any of the arrows that you can reach via X. Good with this part? Okay. The next part is why I'm bringing this up. So here, I didn't change Y's arrow. I had to actually follow Y. On the left, I said Y of 0. So I follow Y, and I get to the very first thing in the array, or the 0th thing in the array. And this is the arrow that I changed. So that's fine. It changes it for Y, right? Now if I explore that again from Y, I get to 10 instead of 5. But the problem is I can also reach that same arrow if I were to explore from X. So if I were to say, where does X point? X points to an array. Okay, where does the arrow in the array point? It points to a 5. So X is an array with 5 in it. But now down here, I say, okay, X points to an array. Okay, well, what's the first thing in the array? It points to a 10. I didn't change it by using the name X, but I changed this arrow, so it has an effect on X.
I'm trying a different approach.
Yeah, go for
if
it.
This isn't working. I'm going to give you a totally different visualization for arrays, like just a different way of thinking about it in case it helps. You can think of like this array as being this like bucket that Jeff was drawing with spaces in it, right? And so if I have X assigned to a point to this array, then and if I also have Y assigned to point to this array, then when I do something like X0 is equal to 5, I'm actually, okay, that was a terrible example. X0 is equal to 1. I'm modifying the array itself.
Mm-hmm.
But X and Y are pointing at the same array.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether you refer to it through X or you refer to it through Y. When
But
change
where are you
the array-
defining in the code that X and Y are the same array? That's my question.
Okay, so that one is about how functions work. This example,
I totally understood that.
yeah.
Okay.
So in this example, I define this array X, and like Julie said, this code is out of order, and the function is probably somewhere else in the file. But I call foo of X on it. When I call foo of X, Java says, okay, well, where's foo? Foo is defined here, helpfully on the slide and nearby. What does foo take as input? Foo takes as input
Why?
an array of integers that it calls Y. Java says, okay, well, I got an array of integers that's currently called X. I need it to be an array of integers that's currently called Y. So what it does to make that happen is it takes the value that you passed as the input to your function, in this case, X. It could have been something else, but in this case, it was X. And it assigns it to what this function expects as input. So Java automatically, when you call this, says Y equals X. Now that that's all set up, now that this function has the input it wants, run this code. Because this code never gets a chance to initialize Y, right? It doesn't get to assign Y to anything. Java has to do it for you. So Java says, all right, you wanted to run foo on X? All right, well, let's say Y equals X. Now we can run the foo code that you wrote. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is a good slide for that. We showed you 6 examples, and it was essentially 3 examples. For all of these examples with like what happens with the boxes, doing it as a function is basically just the same as assigning the input of that function to the thing that you passed into the parentheses. This is also a good diagram for explaining how functions work. But these pieces of code roughly do the same thing. Does this help or hurt understanding?
Okay.
All right. I see a couple of thumbs up and a couple ambivalent, so I'll just move on. It's right about 8:30. I'm going to try to finish up fast. This is just a summary. Variables are like name tags. All we do when we reassign variables is change where that name tag or that arrow points to. And array elements, which are the things inside the array, are also like name tags. The problem is when we change what they point to, we also change something about the array in general, which means that if you have two variables pointing to the same array, you mess with both of them. It's now 8:30. If you guys are out of time and have to go, that's fine. Otherwise, I have a couple more slides that I copied straight from assignment 2B that basically just say what Booleans are. The reason you need to know this is if you're working ahead and already got started on assignment 3 and haven't had time to read the slides, this will explain some of it. It's really simple. You can do it without. You're not going to miss much, and we'll probably do this at the beginning of next class since we didn't get around to it now.
Oh, okay.
There's no point teaching it 3 times. We're gonna do it next
Yeah.
class.
I'll just not do it. Don't worry about it. We'll teach it next time.